Senator Johnson, what purpose?
Questions of the author?
Do yield.
Absolutely, to my fellow freshman.
Thank you, Mr. President and fellow freshman, Senator Fallon. We've talked about this bill a little bit already. Just a couple short questions for you. Do you know how many times the phrase natural persons is used in Article 8 of the Texas Constitution?
I'm thinking you can tell me.
Correct. It's used 6 times.
Okay.
And the proposed bill changes it once. And so what we're going to be left with is a statute that refers to natural persons in 5 places and individuals in lieu of natural persons once. And does that concern you that we may be muddling legislative intent notwithstanding what we say on the floor here?
Yeah, very good question, and they're synonymous terms. And so just so you know, so you can have a sense of solace as well, that this was something that this legislation, pretty much verbatim, in fact it might be word for word verbatim, was proposed in the House of Representatives by my general counsel, but then State Representative Mike Schofield in 2015. So there's no absolutely nefarious intent whatsoever on anyone's part that when they filed it, and that's the way it came back from LLB, because clearly that drafter strongly felt that individual was synonymous with natural person.
Did anyone anywhere in the process from 2015 to now indicate why they felt compelled to change the words natural person to individual? Because is individual more clear or less clear than natural person? Sorry, that's 2 questions.
No, that's a good. So we had the LLB, an attorney from LLB drafting it. They felt clearly it was synonymous because they're not setting policy. And then we had a representative who's also a very good attorney also read it and felt that it was just fine. It didn't get much movement, so it didn't get a lot of eyeballs on it in 2015 in the House. But then, as it so often is when something is filed again, whether it's another chamber or another session, if the bill existed before, they kind of dust it off and say, here's your language again. And that's what occurred this time with another attorney, Representative Jeff Leach, looking at it. And so we've got 3 attorneys, in good faith that eyeball this and feel as if it's covered because a natural person is an individual.
And I'll be clear, I don't question your intent at all. I think your intent is to raise the threshold and to ensure that we've got adequate public input on any period in history in the future where people might want to create an income tax. I recognize that as your intent. I share that intent. I oppose an income tax. But the fact that 3 attorneys looked at this and thought it was necessary to change a term that was already crystal clear does give me some pause.
Sure.
And so my feeling on this is that maybe you should bring it back next session with the right terms or accept the amendment, because we're not in a hurry. Nobody, as you've said, nobody in Texas is proposing an income tax. No one in this body, no one in the public. There's no threat. There's no looming income tax around the corner. As a lawyer, I know that I'm going to be bound by the words that are on the page. And there's a legal maxim that if the drafters changed a word, they did it for a reason. I don't know what the reason is. And you make some very cogent arguments about why we shouldn't be concerned about net income and all those things. And I hear you on those things. But I think that since we're not under a threat of an impending income tax, this should come back clean. Or you could accept the amendment.
And I would argue, Senator, that it's already clean. And it wasn't 3 lawyers changing the words. It was one LLB drafter that felt clearly that it meant.
Fair enough.
I think that's fair. And then you've got, in good faith, a representative who's an attorney looking at it and not even noticing, because individual is clearly means a single human being. It's virtually impossible to find it to mean anything else, I think, to the point of impossibility. And then you have another attorney who gets this language drafted. Now, I am, as you know, not an attorney, so when we did it organically in this chamber, when I read through it, and again, you have more trained eyes, so do the other 3, but I felt as it was no different either. But please consider that we're really talking again about 2 completely different things. We're talking about an income tax and then a margins tax. So it's very difficult to argue that this income tax and this entire piece of legislation, regardless of how it was drafted, would threaten the margins tax because it's not income tax. Now, I would get your point and I would share the concern. If the margins tax was let's say right now in Texas we had an income tax on businesses. Yes, then this language should probably be tweaked up a little bit, but it's completely different. It's out of that same realm. And as you know, the courts decided in 2011 and then just recently in 2017 on the challenges that they decided that the margins tax was not an income tax.
And you're absolutely right. And I think that is an important point. I think it's also important that we recognize that what is the law today and what has been the law for a while might not be the law tomorrow. You may know that in the area of minority shareholder oppression, we had half a century of Texas appellate courts defining and explaining that area of the law. And overnight, the Texas Supreme Court wiped out a half century of law and said there's no such thing. Could it happen here? I think you make some very rational, compelling arguments about the distinction between a net income tax and a margins tax. Where that's going to go, I'm not sure. But again, because I'm not feeling threatened by an income tax, because I don't think anyone wants it, I don't want it, you don't want it, I think this should come back clean. Specifically, last thing, and I'll let you have the last word on this. It concerns me that the term natural persons occurs 6 times in the statute and individual once. And that is going to say, as far as Senator West's point about legislative intent, that signals to the court that there's some intent that an individual means something different than natural person, which opens things up. And I just think it's unnecessary. I'd rather see this clean, and I'd probably vote for it.
One thing that, as you know, there are certain terms that are simply literally mean the same things, i.e. synonymous, and so there's no, they're interchangeable, and I think this is a perfect example of that. And also, it's clear, and as you just stated so eloquently, the people of Texas do not want a state income tax. They just don't. And we have discussed, and I think it's important for the members to hear this as well, that it's instructive sometimes to see what happens in other states. And the state of Washington, very different in many regards than the state of Texas, certainly politically as well, with Seattle being there on the coast, in the Pacific coast. 10 times their citizens have been asked if they wanted an income tax. 10 times since 1934. And every single time they rejected it. And in the most recent case, which I found fascinating, it is important to know because what we do here is policy, but it's also, politics, and they're intertwined. In the state of Washington in 2010, what was on the ballot was we'll only have an income tax for households, single households of over $200,000 in income. This is a decade ago, mind you. Or
is what, mind you?
It was a decade ago, so 2010. So that money was a lot more than it is today. Or a dual income of $400,000. And it overwhelmingly was rejected 60-40. I mean, by a landslide margin. And that's Washington State. So clearly, and we have a poll from the Texas Tribune and the University of Texas that stated, and it was stated in very soft language, would you even consider an income tax if it was going to be used to help fund public education, which we all have endeavored to do, and Chairman Taylor's done a magnificent job, as the Education Committee has. And that was unbelievable. The result was 71% of Texans wouldn't even consider it, and 16% would. Those numbers are astounding. So what we're doing here is the people don't want this in Texas, and we're providing them what they want, which is a higher threshold to prevent something that the people clearly don't want. And that's why it's a really good piece of legislation. Would really appreciate your support on it. And clearly not only the people in Texas, but the people in your district overwhelmingly, probably 4-1, 5-1 margin, don't want this. They want you to vote for it. They want you to feel better about yourself because it's a good piece of legislation.
Thank you.
That's going to increase the climate in Texas.
I am with the people in my district, and I agree with many things that you said, and I agree with your Washington example, and I agree that Texans overwhelmingly reject the idea of an income tax, which is why I'm not sure this piece of legislation is meant to give the people something they want. I think everything's already in place to not have one. I think it may instead be a political buzzsaw to tempt people like me to walk into it, but I'm turning the power switch off, and I think that I would be with you on this legislation if you accept the amendment, and then we're all on the same page.
Senator, you vote for this, we're giving you the buzzsaw in your hands. You got the power. Thank you.
We'll take the power tools later. Thank you.
Thank you.